Okay, folks, we're back for Two Guys in the Cloud. Bob, you were right last time we talked. That was episode 13. So
Yes.
we've gotten past that number 13. We are now at episode 14.
Yes.
And
no more bad
today,
luck. 2020 is over.
No-
Episode 13
yeah,
is over.
right.
We
Oh,
are now
no.
moving
That
to
is-
14. So we got two lucky guests today.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we are joined with Sarah Baskerville and Lou Cody of Smart Technologies. So, folks, thank you for joining us.
Glad you're
Yeah,
here.
thanks for having us.
And of course, Bob and I are the two co-hosts in Two Guys in the Cloud, and we'll be here talking to Sarah and Lou about the cloud and its impact in education. So that's a huge topic. And when we say education, we're talking about K through 12, we're talking about higher ed, the whole thing. I'm sure we're going to bounce back and forth, but clearly the cloud has been instrumental in critical in terms of how our society has navigated through this last year. And we just thought that this would be a very timely conversation. So we're really happy that you all are here. As tradition holds, what we love to do is start this thing by hearing how our guests have gotten into the world of technology. We have found that that's just kind of fascinating. Never one is the same. So I'm all ears here. So Sarah, Lou, tell us, how'd you get here?
Go ahead, Sarah.
Lou, okay. So I actually am a former teacher myself. So my degree is in elementary education. And then when I took on my first teaching role, it was for a teacher that was going on maternity leave. I decided to go back and work on my master's in special education. I did not finish though, because then I quickly realized I wanted to get more into the education tech industry, and there was an opening. So I kind of ditched everything teaching and master's related and started my sales career. But as a teacher, I got really into technology because I had several students using it to be able to communicate with their peers, with their family members, with myself, because I was in a special, education classroom. I was a SPED teacher. And just seeing the way that technology impacted their life was really inspiring to me. And I wanted to learn more about that technology and, what more could it do? So that, kind of put me where I'm at today, because the company that provided the technology that allowed my students to communicate had an opening. I went and worked with them for about 2 or 3 years in selling their solution. And I not only sold into the K-12 space, but also into the adult space as well. So I worked a lot with like the ALS foundations across the Midwest. And speech and language pathologists, and how we can use, at that time, my company's technology in order to help these individuals communicate through like their eye gaze. They could actually look at a screen and select phrases and letters and words to put together. And if they were able to type and use their hands and have that dexterity, then we had technology for that as well. So it just kind of opened up this whole world to me of like, wow, technology doesn't just have to be used, at kind of the consumer level, but people really depend on communicating their needs through technology. So unfortunately, that company I was working for, they merged with one of our top competitors, and there just wasn't much opportunity for some of us to go any further. And I had always had my eye on smart technologies because I also used them in the classroom as a teacher. I had a smart board in my room and used the software, and there was an opening in Chicago. And so I got on with Smart about almost 5 years ago. So that's where I'm at today.
Awesome story. I
That's
love
a really cool story.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Much
The
more
impact.
interesting than my story will be.
Yeah, Lou, you got a tough follow-up to that.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and
I almost feel
it's
bad. Bob and I don't have to tell our stories.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, if you talk to, there's a lot of people in the technology industry, in even the sales space, that are former teachers, or at least that's how they started out. You just don't know it until you ask. And being a former teacher, for some reason, I can always kind of tell, and I'm not surprised when somebody that I'm talking to, does have an education background. I'm like, oh yeah, it's kind of like this, I don't know, like whole language that we speak, I guess. But yeah, it is funny how many people you meet that their career started in education, but because of something that they used in the classroom or an experience they had, took them in a different direction. So
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah, good story.
So Lou, tell us how you've gotten to Lou Cody.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. No, not really. So I was a sociology major, so naturally I went into sales. And back into I was date myself here, but I think in '93 is when I started up with a company called Zenith Data Systems, which at the time, for people that are really older, you'll remember that they used to have TVs, and that there was a group that basically broke off and started making computers. And I remember that their model at the time was they wanted to do like kind of a just-in-time setup. Like Dell had just come onto the scene at that time really strongly, and they had a very competitively priced PC, and people were picking up the phone and calling and buying computers as opposed to going to like a local computer shop. And Zenith, which back at the time they had coded, they had a computer. I'm really dating myself. They had a computer called the Luggable, or the category of computers called Luggables, right? And that was
which is perfect, because just so you know, we did a recording yesterday on devices in the cloud, and it came. This was a big part of the conversation in terms of where we started, and the idea of lugging your laptop someplace was part of it.
The funny thing is, so it was right before my time that I got to Zenith, but the computers I think they co-developed that with Compaq, which is another company that's not around anymore.
I remember Compaq. Yeah,
you remember that?
Yeah, sure
Oh,
did.
Yeah, COMPAQ.
I even interviewed with them one time.
Right? Did you? All right.
And so they co-developed like these portable computers, and again, it was right before my time, but these Luggables were actually almost like the suitcases that where you have the bar and the wheels. Like people would wheel these things in, and they were probably about 60 pounds if I understand correctly. But so they started selling these notebook computers and desktops and all that, and they were hiring an inside sales group in Illinois, and that's where I live. And so I kind of joined the team to do that. And then so just to kind of give a little context, I spent my entire career in the channel, right? And so that means working with resellers who sell the manufacturer's product, whether it's hardware, software. And there's always, and Elliot, I know you know this, right? The industry you're in as well, right? There's so much that goes in between, when a product is manufactured to the time it gets installed, whether it's software, hardware, onto a customer. And so you need to have that channel, right? The reseller, the value-added reseller. I think the names have kind of evolved over the years, but you need a group of people, of businesses that really take it that last mile to the customer. And so I spent my entire career and working usually on the manufacturing side, not always, sometimes at the partner side, but working to make sure that they're getting what they need. Business plans, this all the business things you do to get technology into the end user, whether it's a company or in this case with Smart. Within schools. All right. So I spent a lot of time in the channel over 20 plus years. Obviously, I spent a good chunk of time at Microsoft. And, after that, my time there, I skipped around a little bit, and within, I've been at Smart now for three plus years, and it's the first time I've been in the education space. So it was kind of fun, having spent so much time focused on the business end customer and the resellers that service those customers. Getting to work in the education space with a cool product that Smart sells, it was really kind of fun. And it was almost like not starting over, but having to learn a whole new part of the business and the different type of customers that Smart sold to, as opposed to what I was familiar with.
Yeah, no, yes, it's a journey. And I know that there's a lot of rewarding elements to kind of coupling a career in technology with a solution that helps people. So
Right.
that's that's really good. Bob, you were on the cusp of
Yeah,
asking a
I got
question.
one
See
story.
that.
I got to share a story with Lou. So, you talk about dating yourself. I'm going to really date myself, but this was when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, my grandfather bought us a gigantic Zenith TV. Okay. It was one of the big ones of the tubes, and it had like this wooden case around it. I mean, it must have weighed like 500 pounds. It took 4 or 5 people to move the damn thing. But we get it in, okay, and here comes the dated part. It was one of the first remote TVs ever, right? So
Did
it
it have
was
a
a
nice chink sound?
the
with the-
cha-chink
Yeah,
sound, yes. It had the
I remember
4
the
buttons on it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it was cha-chink, cha-chink, and it was remote by sound. And when the dog barked or you dropped your keys, it would change the channel. Because
It was all based on
sound.
sound.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah,
So,
Sarah has no idea what we're talking about
I
right now.
don't.
no, she doesn't. She's
Yeah,
like,
I'm
what's
just
that?
laughing
no,
and nodding.
It's like,
Yeah.
wait,
She's being
remote
so
controls
polite.
that-
You could see it in
I
her
know it.
face.
and it was a
know.
mechanical
Yes.
thing, which is the funniest part, right? It
Yeah.
was like a metal ping sound.
It
so-
was. It was
Yeah.
just
But
hilarious.
you
And it
needed
had like
you
only
needed
4
muscle.
buttons.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Well, I remember, we're going off on the old TV stuff, but I remember, like after, like Sunday after, say, going to church, some going to my grandmother's house, and she had a black and white TV in her living room that we would go watch old movies in black and white, but it didn't matter if they were in color because her TV was black and white.
Right.
And trying to explain to, your kids that there were like maybe 5 channels if you got that, in Chicago area, was it WPWR, channel 50?
UGN. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
There was
The
like
other
4
I don't know.
channels that we
ABC,
had.
NBC, CBS, WGN. That's what
There
I'm.
were
Yep.
4 or 5
Yeah.
maybe. Yep.
And now, so you guys got me on this TV thing. So forwarding into the future, I mean, you guys remember when you got your first DVR?
Oh, sure. Mhm.
Like it just flew out of my head with the first one, the TiVo. I actually, when those were coming out, no one had them, and there was a contest that popped up. I don't know where it was. I somehow found it online even back then, and you had to write some poem or something like why you deserved a TiVo. They were just going to give them out, and they selected me, and I got this thing in the mail, and my wife's like, what is this thing? And as soon as you could start recording TV, basically on a hard drive, it was like,
Blew your mind.
kind of blew
I
everybody.
do remember the TiVo.
Yeah.
Nice,
Thank
Sarah.
God.
That's good.
That's good.
But we'll bring the conversation back into this century. But the other thing for me was like when the first plasma, I remember going into electronics store and seeing the first plasma TV and looking at it. Wow. And it was $12,000.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think we'll take a pass on that one.
So great, so great opportunity to pivot
Yes.
to higher education or K through 12 and technology in the cloud and so forth. And I know we can start almost anywhere. And I guess I want to start with where Smart is today. So a bit of cheating. My wife is a teacher, so I've watched as she's leveraged the Smart board and I want to say Prometheus. I don't know if that's correct or not, but other technologies that are used within a classroom. And they're physical and, they're used to, I guess, Sarah, you described it so well, the idea of coupling technology with the learning process to help students evolve faster, however we want to put it. But then today, obviously, we're not in the classroom, so we're leveraging technology in different ways. How's it playing out today? I mean, how are we in the classroom today taking care of business with the cloud or technology?
Yeah, great question. And being a former teacher, and I taught it was like 2009 to 2012, and where technology was then to like when I'm in classrooms today, what I see, it definitely has caught up because I feel like right when I was out of college, got my first teaching job back then, I just felt like people weren't putting an emphasis on the importance of technology in the classroom. The fact that these students are going to leave this education space one day and they're not going to have the skills to, set themselves up for success in the workforce, or whether they go on to higher education. I truly felt that when I was a teacher then, but now when I go into classrooms, most classrooms, I am very impressed with how I see students leveraging the cloud, leveraging hardware, and even communicating with their peers and their teachers using those tools. So it's that's really exciting that we've gotten to that point. I will say when I started at Smart, we had just introduced a cloud solution called the Smart Learning Suite Online. However, it wasn't really off the ground just yet. It was very, very early stages. And again, just within these last 5 years to see where we're at today with that and how our number of users has increased, it has been really exciting to see. So, technology, education had to evolve, and I really think technology, I don't want to say forced, but because that sounds kind of negative, but it did. It kind of forced education to catch up with what we're doing in the workspace and what we're doing in higher education day to day. So.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that's interesting. So it almost means that there's sort of two conversations. There's how does technology help a student learn better in general, period. And then there is how does the classroom, or how do teachers, or how does education leverage technology to prepare the student for the world out there that uses and needs technology every day? There's sort of like two buckets.
Yep.
And my first thought is, just in terms of how are we helping students learn better today through technology? So,
Yep.
I know, if I look at it's hilarious. My wife's classroom is literally below me. I'm in the attic of my home, and her classroom is like below me. And every once in a while, I'll go downstairs and I'll walk by and I'll listen to them talking, and it's adorable, that, I'm doing all this, and I love the banter. And she only once let me say hi to the class, and I almost got nauseous because there were all these little faces like bouncing all over the place. They're like second graders and can't stop moving, and I'm just watching them, and it's adorable, right? And it's clear that they're using technology to learn. They're on Zoom, and they're using video to communicate, and there's some collaboration there. But I don't know anymore. So
Right.
what are the tools? What are we using from a technology perspective, vis-a-vis, and it doesn't have to be the cloud, but in this case, I think it's baked in. How are we helping students learn better using technology?
So two things really come to mind for me. One of those is we are able to take students places that they never, have been before using technology. And some students will never get the opportunity to go to certain places because of their demographic or whatever. So the fact that we're able to open their eyes to just different people, different cultures, just different things through technology is really important. And something that when I was in school and we didn't have that type of technology, myself, you guys, we were never able to experience that at a young age unless we were physically taken there by, our parents or a family member or whatever. So, so to me, that's really cool that we can give every student an opportunity to experience something different. The other thing that comes to mind is, and this is kind of a buzzword in education right now, but it's true in that we, through technology, can kind of check in better with our students. And in education, we refer to that as social emotional learning. Again, if we think back to when we all were in school, teachers assessed your knowledge by, most teachers, you fill out a worksheet or you fill in your bubbles on your Scantron sheet and they grade it. and that was that. You turn in a physical piece of paper, and that's how you were assessed. Nowadays, through technology, teachers have the ability to not just assess your knowledge, but also assess, how you're feeling about a certain subject, or how you're feeling about, maybe interacting with your peers. And I say that because there are a lot of solutions now in education that allow teachers to do this without students putting their name on it. So, a teacher may be able to send out just a quick either check for understanding or, hey guys, how are we feeling about this? Do you feel like you need more support? Are you feeling behind? However they, frame the question. And students can actually respond, without their name being tied to their response. So they're going to feel more comfortable by sharing that information instead of the teacher calling on you, to read, and you don't feel comfortable reading in front of the class type of thing. So those are the two main things that come to mind. Being a former teacher myself, and then still being in the industry and kind of comparing now to when I was a teacher, those are the two things that I see have vastly improved. So,
can I touch on that? Oh, sorry, Luke. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I wanted to mention that even before COVID happened, there had been a very strong trend in schools deploying what's called the one-to-one technology, right? So even in the classroom, I've got kids that are gone through high school. I got one still in high school, and they were all issued these Chromebooks, right? And that allowed for a lot of that type of interaction that Sarah's talking about. But and it's certainly that we don't sell those, but it definitely became once COVID hit, the need to be able to remote teach and to have kids engaged and process the information and just do their work at home became, much more of a key need. And so what we saw in the industry was even, things that we were anticipating where budgets were going to go towards buying our panels, it went to devices, right? And so a lot of I think Chromebooks are still getting delivered that were purchased probably 6 months ago, right? Because there was such a surge in need for those. And what that allows, and even when you think about cell phones, right? Our technology is designed so that you can share it out, not just like when you're in a classroom with these kids, if they have their Chromebooks up and doing this one-to-one engaging of the material with the teacher while they're teaching, but it works while they're at home too. So you can have a teacher in like some of them are going to their classroom at the school using our panels, but then sharing a Zoom video call, but then also using, say, smart software to make sure that the kids are seeing the actual documents on their device in front of them at the same time. So I think it's been really interesting. I think Smart was well positioned as a solution prior to COVID, but once COVID hit, and then once there was this push for one-to-one technology, we really fit nicely with the situation, and we've seen a lot of more. Smart's been doing this over 20 years, but it's been an interesting resurgence of in our software solution in addition to our hardware.
Good. Yep. Good. So, guys, I got a question. I have a college freshman, and my daughter's in high school. And one of the things I was frustrated with as they went through the school systems is the lack of technology in the classroom. And my question to you is, why has education, and maybe this is my perception, so I'll ask it that way as well. My perception has been education market as a whole has been a little bit afraid of technology, afraid of leveraging some of the things that we use in business or use in everyday life, and haven't leveraged that in the classroom to the best of their ability. Is there a reason for that? Is it cost? Are they worried about support? What has made the educational market so adverse to technology? That's probably the best way to put it.
So it's a great question. And I think it totally depends on where you're at. because every district leader is going to have a different philosophy on technology in the classroom. You're going to see some districts, and I cover every state west of, like, from Illinois west. So I cover lots of different regions throughout the US. But, every district and kind of their philosophy towards technology is different. You have some leaders that are very progressive and just way ahead of the game. And you can see that in how they implement and how they train staff and get technology into the hands of students. You have some districts who have leaders who themselves are a little intimidated by technology. So therefore, they're not going to, pursue it as heavily as another district. So it really depends on kind of the leadership at each district, I would say.
Yeah.
Lou, I don't know if
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've definitely, I don't cover as many states as Sarah, and we're a little bit, again, on the different sides of the coin. Sarah's focused on these schools, engaging with them directly, and I'm working with the resellers that sell to those schools. I cover about 8 states in what we call the Central Plains territory. And it's interesting, right? Kind of to underscore what Sarah's saying, state by state, there are different philosophies, strategies. And, just coming into the education space for people that are maybe doing that now for the first time or not unfamiliar with it, it was interesting to me to understand, and it makes total sense once you're in it, but they do have, tech administrators and people that are solely focused on technology, much like a company would be within the context of their environment, right? So, but you do have people making these decisions. And I think that, they answer the question about why some of them are just spending money on different things, right? There could be, like we're talking about Chromebooks, which is, it's technology, but it's, say, different than buying panels or overhead projectors. There's more, we typically, when we go through our, like, say, a normal year, you going to trade shows, there are some unbelievable amount of things that schools and districts can purchase, whether it's technology or otherwise, that is being innovated every year. So that budget could be going towards buying, something still tangible like flashcards or, robot kits and some of it's books and some of the stuff that is more traditional. So I think it's like they're always weighing that budget and saying, okay, we're going to set aside this amount for technology and this for others. And then I do think that there are some have just, depending on the school district that you're in, they just have a philosophy that technology is less or more important. Some people think it's distracting, and then some people embrace it as far as they can possibly take it. That said, I do see even the states that I'll say have been lagging behind, whether it's for whatever reason, including budget, we are seeing them going, slowly. Some of them are still moving in the direction of more technology. And I would say, your kids might be out of school by the time that it's fully implemented, but I think within the next 5 years, you won't have a classroom that doesn't have some type of interactivity, one-to-one devices, and, even VR and all these things. I think it's going to become very, very commonplace. Last thing I'll say, which at least in my experience, the schools that have lagged behind hasn't been so much the K through 12. It's actually been the universities and colleges. We sell way more technology to K through 12 than we do through to colleges, because just for a lot of different reasons, right? But we're starting to see them also engage with us and other technology companies to get their classrooms up to speed.
Good. Thank you.
And I'll add to that as well. You could put hardware and technology into the hands of students, but as a district, as an organization, if you don't have a model of how to implement that successfully and kind of track progress on that, then, it's going to be just a piece of hardware. So you have to be able to have, benchmarks and measurable tools as you implement that. You can't just say, okay, we just unboxed all these Chromebooks. Here, students, here you go. and call it a day. Like, the districts that are successfully using technology, they follow specific models on how to measure success of students using that technology, if that makes sense.
And just one other thing about that in relation to SMART, to Sarah's point, which is a lot of people in Sarah's role and the sales reps that are underneath her and her peers, many of them are former educators. And so they can talk the language when they go into these schools, but we have a whole efficacy and implementation team. And it's one thing to sell technology, but to understand how it fits in the classroom and how you get results, as Sarah's saying. SMART, that's a huge priority for SMART. And I think it speaks to the need for not just coming out with the latest piece of technology because someone that created it thinks it's cool and it's going to help people. You really have to integrate it into the workflow. Or we talk a lot about meeting kids where they're at, meeting schools where they're at. You can't just dump a bunch of technology on a school and think that they're going to be successful in it. It's a very much a thought out process that schools go through, at least the ones that are doing it or have been doing it for a while. I think the schools that are coming into the technology are learning that it's not as simple as ordering a bunch of panels. It's how does this fit into our daily teaching flow so we're getting the outcomes that we want.
Yeah, they need a technology strategy, not a point solution, right?
100%.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I would also imagine COVID pulled some of the laggards ahead quickly, right? Because they had to find a solution in a matter of days to do remote learning than years, which they probably would have liked to have. So
right, it's the situation and luckily the funding that came in from the government that allowed them, a lot of schools, to accelerate their technology.
Right. So hopefully technology will, for some of those laggards, be a big step forward now. And, with all the negatives we talked about in our year-end show, all the negatives that 2020 brought us, maybe that will be a positive moving forward. So that's great to hear.
Yep, and I think it will give students more flexibility and parents moving forward. This whole notion of blended learning, I'm sure you guys have heard that it's not new because of COVID. Blended learning has been around, and it's basically just meeting students where they're at. If they have to be home because, like I have a friend, her daughter is in first grade and she's battling leukemia, so she still has a year of treatment. And so even pre-COVID, her daughter, was only learning from home because it was too dangerous for her to go to school. So her school was able to meet her where she was at and provide the technology to be able to, keep her up to speed and not fall behind at all. And clearly COVID has forced that students and teachers to do that across the world. So it's really, really interesting to see. So.
Yeah. So, okay. Fascinating conversation. And so the two things that I'm pulling from that, one is, hey, the cloud enabled us to deliver workstations like the Chrome workbook at a cost-effective way so that we could survive as an educational nation, during a time of crisis. The other thing is the cloud enables this, helping the student where they are, so the remote learning kind of concept. And then Lou, what you said was really fascinating to me, this idea that as the teacher and student are engaging in education, there are learnings along the way that I imagine are being captured through, the SMART ecosystem. And forgive me, I don't have the right words because, but you said the learning suite, and I'm imagining you're building, what I think is implied in there is that you're building this level of intelligence, this idea of what are best practices, this idea of what are the KPIs that should be looked at in order for a student to know if they're on track or not. And is that where SMART's pivoting? Is that where SMART is now, where it's sort of, hey, we're not, to Bob's point, that point solution anymore. We're this entire, best practice suite. Is that what this is?
Well, yeah. And Sarah can certainly go into more detail, but just what I would say is that when you look at, say, our learning our SMART software, there's all these different LMSs or learning management systems that are out there, and you have the big ones, which are maybe obvious, like Google or even Microsoft, they have these big cloud platforms, right, that offer a lot of things to businesses, to education, and certainly Google's been one of the leading companies building these platforms that teachers have access to share their files, to all types of things like that. Smart is like another layer on top of that now. And what those platforms have allowed us to do is to innovate in our specific, to your point, like, we call them KPIs from a business standpoint, but these different measurements.
I knew the second I said it.
I'm still learning too.
So
Sarah's, but they're able to measure, and that really, I think, is where things are going, right? Is being able to say, great, you have all this technology, you have access to the cloud. It's wonderful. It's amazing. But is it doing what we want it to do? And how do you know that, right? I'm sure you guys, Bob, if your daughter in high school, you may be signed up to some type of a text service, right? Where if you get your kids' grades, and that shows you how they're doing, and that's a good check. Sometimes they don't like that, of course, but the kids. But it allows you to, as a parent, to check in, and I think things like that allow you to say, hey, is this working? Are we having success? Smart is very cognizant of that, and building technology that will allow teachers to, share that information out, measure what their reactions are, and even just some of the stuff that's built into our software, which is like these response capabilities. It's not just watching a screen, right, and say, okay, now it's just a digital screen versus the whiteboard or chalkboard at the school. They can have, teacher can check for understanding in the middle of a lesson within Smart Learning Suite. And they could the teacher, once they're proficient, which doesn't honestly take that long, they could throw up a multiple choice in the middle of the class and say, hey, are you guys understanding what it means, that, whatever the division of a cell is happening, mitosis. I'm just going to throw out fancy words, but you know what I mean? Because I don't remember any of those things, but I'm a sociology major. But you know what I'm saying, right? They can check for understanding in the middle of it. And so it's not just about, hey, how did this day go? How did this week or month or year go? It's literally in the middle of a class. Teacher can pause, put a few questions out there, and get immediate feedback so she understands if the kids are learning. And that's extremely important in this scenario of remote teaching, right? Where the teacher doesn't have the ability to be in the same room and understand the looks on the faces, especially now with kids. I know what they do. They put their panels down and they show the ceiling fan, and teachers are just like, they can't stop every time a kid does that. So this at least allows them to say, hey, did everyone respond? Do they understand what's happening? And so that's Smart is all about trying to help teachers with that aspect of teaching.
Yeah. So what are are there learnings from all that, this year or over time, where all of, some sort of aggregation of information, something that over the last year has been a pronounced learning?
Well, do you mean like at Smart specifically?
No, it doesn't have to be. I mean, the way I look at this is, for maybe the first time ever, we have this ability to really truly measure and understand how our children are learning and what's working and what's not working. And, there's this thought that something was surprising, that, oh God, it doesn't work like that. Or you'd be surprised how much they actually pick up within, this sort of context or anything like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't say like one individual thing. I would even go beyond this past year. I think one thing that that at least I've seen, and this is coming from my perspective. Again, I'm not a teacher, as you know, but I am in and out of, well, pre-COVID, I was in and out of a lot of classrooms and a lot of schools working with them. One thing that I've seen these types of solutions kind of force is more collaboration amongst students and teachers. And, like you go into a classroom, well, post-COVID and even pre-COVID, you saw classrooms kind of shifting to these like pods or like learning centers, if you will, like newly renovated schools, some that I've walked into, they have classrooms, but then they also have these little conference spaces because, with an actual conference like table and some chairs, and students can connect their device and, share content to the main monitor in that room as if you would in a business type setting or meeting. And, that was kind of the whole goal, is moving away from desks, in rows, and students only working on their individual work and not being able to ask their neighbor for help. Like, technology is helping education move away from that model, because to me that model doesn't work. You don't use that model when you go into the workforce at all. So why would we set our students up for that, right? So I do like how these solutions are helping students collaborate more with one another. And teachers assess differently because of that. So they're not just assessing on whether Tommy got these 10 answers correct on this worksheet. Teachers are assessing on how Tommy is interacting with his peers now more than ever. And is he asking peers for help and to work together on this, which is something that's not on paper, right? So that's, that's one thing, that kind of one of the main things that I've seen over the last several years as to what I guess teachers and us at SMART, what we're learning because of technology, and how we kind of adjust the way we teach and then adjust our product offering to meet that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
That's a real interesting point, because I've never thought about collaboration in schools being bad, but when we were in school, that was cheating.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of, the reason that there's a term old school is because there's a lot of people that are stuck in that type of mindset. And collaboration now is really important. And if you can't collaborate in the world, in a business session, and socially, collaborate, you're missing it. And finally having the school system catch up to that is a great point, Sarah. I never really thought about it like that. That's a very solid point. Collaboration being a big thing that schools had to overcome, and having people work together is not a bad thing. Because
Right.
if you're if you're struggling with a topic or struggling with a theory or an area, you may learn better from a peer than you would even a teacher that's an
Right.
authority figure, right? So, opening up that collaboration can only help that person. And I'm sure there's ways to use it for bad things, but to me, there's a lot of upside there. So that's very interesting.
Yep, because we all think differently. So why not gain your perspective and how you resolved this issue? Because even you're going to think differently than your teacher. And I actually hear a lot of that, like these teachers who do grasp this concept and who are very progressive in how they instruct and how they use technology. They always say, well, I learn most from my students.
Yeah.
Like, there's no going back to a class or a textbook that's going to teach me what my students have taught me. So,
even a quick story from myself. My daughter was struggling in math this past semester, and one of her peers on the swim team said, I'd be happy to tutor you. And I was like, okay, when is he coming over? And she's like, Dad, he doesn't need to come over. I can just do it right here with him on whatever. So
on Snapchat, hopefully not Snapchat.
That's right. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So
well, and we always have to be on the lookout for device-olation is the term that we use, at least in education. We don't want students to get isolated on their devices. We want them to use their devices to really enhance and facilitate collaboration, which is kind of it's a double-edged sword, I guess, because a lot of times we as humans isolate ourselves on our devices. And I think that happened early on in education when because again, when I was a teacher, iPads were the hot new thing. Like the first model iPad, I remember like my classroom got them. And then it's like, okay, great, everybody gets an iPad, but then they're just all on like playing their own education apps. And it's like, wait, I think we're missing the point here. So even that, that whole concept had to kind of be worked out in education, and we've gotten a lot better at it. So
can I tell you how grateful I am to hear that? I seriously, one of the topics that I had thought of going into this discussion was, our social responsibility when it comes to technology and it comes to education. And, and then there's two things that were just said in the last 5 minutes that are fantastic if you really think about it. That through technology, we're developing a culture within our children to collaborate, to understand each other better, to be able to come to a better understanding, which our society clearly desperately needs. And, just being able to build in those fundamentals into the way they learn how to evolve is critical. And then the flip side to it is at least acknowledging the fact that, technology, like anything else, has two sides, a good and a bad. Technology is not bad. Technology is. And it's how you, leverage it. And the fact that our education system acknowledges that there's such a thing as, I'm going to slaughter this, deviceolation, is,
there you go.
is important. And, being able to be tuned into that. And if we identify that there's a student that is there, because the last thing we need is, people growing up to only get one source of truth or one sense of anything. And this is great. I'm really happy to hear all those things. I'm glad that, I think it's really important that as education evolves and becomes so tightly linked to technology, that there's that understanding and that social responsibility. So I'm really happy to hear it.
Yeah, there's a very large school district that I'm thinking about in my territory that they have plenty of resources and they definitely have implemented technology, so it's about, I would say as far as it can go, but definitely they're in the probably 5 percentile or, upper 5 percentile of implementation of technology and whatever else they need of resources. And, they do this annual conference, and I think about 2 years ago I was at this conference, and they shifted away. The whole topic, the whole focus of that conference, or I wouldn't say the whole, but like the majority focus was on social and emotional learning and situations, because they had a jump in suicide rates in their school district, and maybe some of the pressure that these kids felt that they were under, and they kind of full stop. They just kind of addressed it head on to the entire district and started focusing on that. So to kind of underscoring your point, which is technology is a tool, and if the tool helps you get where you need to go, that's great. But we're all human beings, and we live with technology. We don't live at under technology, right? We should engage as humans, and not always just through technology when possible. Obviously, in the times that we're in, it's a little bit more challenging, but schools are very aware of that. And I think that it kind of is a little bit like a pendulum, right? When you think, oh, hey, there's this new thing that can help to us as kids in schools, schools that have resources, they go all in, which is great. But then there does need to be that recognition that it's not the end all be all. It needs to be integrated and not just deployed, right?
Yeah, well said. So what are we not covering? I mean, what is, if you think about your world and, what are the challenges in terms of education and enabling technology within education? What are the hot spots? What are the things that, you wake up, because I wake up thinking about things like KPIs, different things, like what are you worried about?
So one thing that I wanted to talk about, but there really wasn't an appropriate time to squeeze it in yet, was the fact that, and this is SMART related, at SMART, we, really have focused the last several years on partnerships and integrating with, like Lou mentioned earlier, like Google and Microsoft. And some people would think, well, isn't that your competitor? And it's not, because Google and Microsoft offer the platform. We help enhance that platform for teachers and students, right? So if I'm a teacher and all of my content for my day to deliver my lessons is saved in my Google Drive, for instance, why would I want one of, and why would I want one of our end users to go outside of their Google Drive in order to use our solution? So we really focus on integrating with teachers' daily workflows so that it's easy for them to use and it's super convenient. So that's just one example of, from Google Drive, you can now access your smart content and launch it and start delivering it to students right away. You can do the same thing through Microsoft Teams. And we have a whole team at Smart dedicated to working on these ongoing partnerships with these other education technology companies. Teachers, the way grades are now, there's no such thing. Well, I'm sure there is a such thing as like a physical grade book. But again, if we all think back to when we were in school, I remember my teacher sitting there at the desk physically writing in grades on a grade book, right? Well, that's all cloud-based nowadays. So in using our solution, how can you pull assessment from our solution and it go directly into your online grade book? So again, without having to even copy and paste, like how does it just import directly from us to your online gradebook system, again, to make it easy and efficient for you as the teacher. So those types of integrations and partnerships are a huge focus at Smart right now, and will continue to be. So.
No, I'm glad you called it. And frankly, that's where, folks like Bob and I live, right? So, in our world, it's, working with folks like, you and companies like Smart to help them build those points, let's call it points of integration, and,
Okay.
Enhance your solutions so that, things are better, stronger, faster, right? And connecting the dots between your platform and platforms like, and I'm assuming when you talk about Microsoft, you're talking about either Azure or 365, right? And, Google Cloud, right? And those are very expansive conversations, and the world's your oyster, in terms of just being able to map to where the needs are and, getting yourself to the right place.
Yep.
But it's a fantastic strategy and makes a ton of sense, and it's very smart and very collaborative, by the way. Just want to say, very collaborative. So it's perfect. It's perfect.
So, and I mentioned that because if you don't do those types of things, I think the way you framed your question, I think you asked about the challenges. There's obviously more challenges, but from a product standpoint, I think those types of integrations are expected from our customers at this point. And it's one of the questions that we get asked a lot too when we are talking to these school district leaders is, who do you integrate with? Who do you partner with? Because it makes sense. You don't want to have your end users running like 10 tabs at a time, right? Why not for all these different needs? Why not bring them all together? And that's what we're getting better and better at each day. So.
Yeah. And that's been, the very steady path of technology, moving from, world of proprietary, this is my box, to everything being open, and Microsoft's got a very sordid story there that, has evolved to a point where today everything is very open. But once upon a time, it either, think about it, once upon a time, things either ran on Microsoft or they ran on Apple, and today pretty much everything runs in the cloud, and it's, it's very open. So it's very thoughtful.
Great point. Yeah.
Guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Great topics. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. I felt like, very, very insightful, thoughtful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks for having us. This was fun. You. I wish every 10 a.m. Friday morning meeting could be this.
Agreed. Anyway, thanks again. Thanks everybody who's been tuned in to our story here today. And we look forward to you joining us at our next episode. Bye, everybody.